As Australian governments deal with the economic fallout from COVID-19, there are growing calls to axe one of the country's most unpopular taxes. Land transfer tax, better known as stamp duty, has been used in Australia for more than a century.
Historically, you would have a legal document that needed to be officially assessed, and you would purchase a stamp, and that stamp would be affixed to the document, therefore giving it legal standing. So it's always been a very easy tax to collect, and that's why it's had such a central role in Australia and in other countries.
But there are questions about how efficient stamp duty will be for plugging economic holes after the health crisis.
Because stamp duty is only levied on properties that are transacted, it's really reliant on a high volume of transaction or prices increasing. So it can be very volatile. When the market's strong, it goes up, and when the market's weak, it falls.
Stamp duty is a huge revenue source for governments, but only a small number of home buyers pay the tax.
At the moment, turnover of properties is about 5% every year. So those 5% of people who are buying a property are essentially paying, something like 20 to 25% of the state government's revenues. And it's particularly unfair because it penalises families that tend to move more often, which tend to be younger people, who are often moving in order to find better employment. Stamp duty is an enormous cost on those decisions because the average rate of stamp duty in, say, Melbourne and Sydney is around $40,000 for a property. And therefore, that is, a very large share of the average wage. Stamp duty is Australia's most economically destructive tax. We estimate that if we abolish stamp duty, then Australians could be up to $17 billion a year better off.
But what about the virus-hit economy? A proposal to replace stamp duty with a broad-based property tax is gaining momentum.
A broad-based land tax would be consistent. It'd be collected from everyone, not just people that transact. And that means that the governments can better plan for their expenditure going forward because they know how much they're going to get year to year. The economic benefit of stamp duty has been, particularly for the larger states and territories, the housing market has been strong for a very long time. So it has generally been moving higher, but looking at 3, potentially 4 years of falling stamp duty revenue, you can understand why state and territory governments are now considering a move away from stamp duty and probably to a land tax.
But just like any tax reform, introducing a broad-based property tax will come with challenges.
There are 3 main hurdles. First, there's a lot of people who have just paid stamp duty, and if you tried to sign them up to pay an annual land tax, which would be in the realm of probably $2,000 a year in states like New South Wales and Victoria for the average property owner, they're going to resist that very strongly. Secondly, we have the challenge of asset-rich, income-poor households, largely older Australians who are living in large, quite valuable properties but have very little cash flow. And they can obviously opt out of stamp duty by not moving, but they would be captured by a land tax. And then thirdly, you've got the challenge of the revenue and the transition. So state governments rely very heavily on stamp duty revenues to fund their budgets.
The transition away from stamp duty is going to be the toughest thing because people that have just paid it are not going to be too keen to pay land tax on top of that. So the best way to do it is probably to phase it in over a period of time, maybe 10 years, and slowly increase the amount of land tax people have to pay over that time and slowly decrease the amount of stamp duty revenue they have to pay as well.